identify with Peter so much. I put my foot in my mouth when I don't. Peter's an unusual guy, and of course, he was the leader, and thank God for that. Determined guy. And who's yours, Billy? Oh, you're going to take Peter too. I'm glad you spoke up first time. So if you couldn't take Peter, who would you take? John the Beloved or John the Baptist? Okay. Now, Dave, I'm just waiting the last one. Moses. Yancey, have you thought of anybody you'd like to think?
I'm drawn a blank as you asked the question. But I have, a lot of the stories that I like. I like the story of Job and Shadrach, Meshach, and
Now that's a good group right there.
right, but that's three guys. So
Well, that's okay, because you could have those three guys, because you know what? That was a trio that was really serious for God. They endured the furnace. Man, can you imagine going in that furnace? I mean, heating it up, and you think, well, what's it like? It's just a big open fire that you just absolutely can burn stuff, and throwing them in there. And then the Bible says they got up and started walking around. I heard a guy preach one day. He said, I told Jesus, if you'll tell me why they were walking around, I'll tell the world. Jack Hudson, he was a preacher. He's a stock car driver. And so he says, one day, he said, it just came across my mind. He said, I don't know if it came from God or not, but I'm going to tell you what I thought about. Why were they walking around in that fire? He said, the devil's fire has never been something a Christian can warm up to. They walked around just to stay warm. But they were walking with Jesus. And then somebody said that the king Nebuchadnezzar saw Jesus. And they said, well, the Bible doesn't say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saw him. It said the king did. And they said, it's not important that you see him. It's important that the world see Jesus with you. Well, I think they saw him too. I mean, come on. Jesus ain't going to hide himself from them guys in the middle of fire. Anybody else? Let's see. Did everybody get one? I was surprised somebody took Gideon. You want to trade Philip for Gideon, Gene? No, I don't want you. I don't want you to abandon Philip, because Philip was quite a thing. my brother was preaching on Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. You know what eunuch means, right? Does everybody know what that means? And so he had a guy in his church in New Jersey that got saved, and he's from Ethiopia. And so my brother, he got saved, he got baptized, and my brother about 4 or 5 weeks later said, I tell you what, God's been so good to us, we've had an Ethiopian eunuch saved here. And the guy said, hey, I'm not a eunuch. He said, I'm not a eunuch, Pastor. He wanted everybody to know that. Right in the middle of church, he hollered it out. And I think he was a doctor, if my memory serves me correct. But anyway, well, look, I want you to think about some people. And if you were going to come up with one truth, just one lesson of life that you would get from those people you mentioned. Now, who did you mention, John? Bezaleel. Freddie's David, Tom, Peter, Billy was. Well, I'm going to have to get you to switch though. John the Beloved, Dave, Moses, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Philip, and Paul. If you were going to get one lesson of life, just one, from those guys, what would that lesson be? Don't tell me now. Just think about it, you know. Like, for example, you know, I'd say Gideon, you know. What would you say is a lesson from Gideon? Because he's not anybody's. What would you say is just a lesson you learned from Gideon?
God can work in anybody, even someone like Gideon. He thought, I had nothing. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, the family and the worst of my family. So God can work in anyone, no matter who you are.
So that's a good lesson. What's another lesson from Gideon?
Leadership.
And was he born a leader? How did he become a leader? So there's a lesson on that one. What's another one about Gideon, if you think about it? Well, how many did he start off with? Billy, how many did he start off with? How many did he end up with? So little as much when God's in it. You don't need a big army to win the battle, do you? Huh? Well, see, everybody that God puts in the Bible has a lesson of life. And think about how strong a man would be if he just had a few lessons from these different men in the Bible about how they were special, something God let us know about them. You know what I mean? Like Zacchaeus. What was so special about Zacchaeus? I'll give you an illustration what I mean. When my granddaughters were young, they were teenagers, young teens, before they got serious about a boyfriend. Of course, they probably had boyfriends way before we ever knew about it. But I asked them, I set them down, and at that time we had a lot of men, and they knew a lot of men because where they came from. So I picked some men, and I gave them 10 men, good men, you know, but 10 men. And I said, I want you to think about these 10 men. And so I told them they knew the 10 men. And like John Ford was a man, Billy was one of the men. And so I'd say, John Ford, think about John. What kind of man is John? What's special about John? Billy, what kind of man is Billy? And then I just gave them 10 men. We wrote them down, 10 men. And I said, you know, now, then I said, I want you to take all the young men that you know, teenagers, young men you know. And so they gave me a list of young men they knew, teenagers. They were going to school, so they had a lot of teenagers. So I said this to them. Now I want you girls to, we took one guy at a time, and I said, who is he most like out of these 10 men? Who is he most like? Who would he be similar to? And they said, oh, he'd be like him. Yeah. Okay, then I said, we took another one. I said, and who is this guy like? And they said, he'd be like him. And I did that on purpose so that they could see that this man, he's kind of like that guy. He's kind of like that guy. He's kind of like that guy. And he's kind of like that guy. How many know what I'm talking about? Do you follow me so far? So I said, okay, girls, that's the way men are. They're all similar. They're like other men. But I said, what you do in the Lord's work is you try to take each man and let them learn from other men great things and incorporate them in their life. So I said, for example, we got John, and Rick Dugan was one of the men. So let's take John, Rick, and Billy. How many knew Rick Dugan? Okay, how many knew Brother John? How many know Billy? How many would say they are totally different, completely different, right? They're really completely different. Now, they were dedicated to God, but completely different. John had 2 boys. Rick had 2 boys. That's similar. Billy has a daughter and a son. They both were wonderful husbands, but they did different things. Billy was a grower, and he was, of course, now assistant pastor here. So Billy learned how to grow things. Rick learned, when he was in the Army, he learned that you could get training, and so he got certified in 26 programs in medicine training to train people in doing things. 26 certifications. I can't imagine that. But the whole time he was in the military, he was in school also learning these certifications. And so he ended up teaching people how to examine and use nuclear medicine and all these things. He was really a sharp guy. He could train doctors on how to use all the equipment. So he went to work, and they would sit up these examining rooms and places, whatever it was, heart cath or whatever. He would go in and train all the people on how to use those. He learned that when he's in the military, getting 26 certifications. I learned from Rick, certification is better than a degree. You know what I mean? And then John Ford was a master plumber and a wonderful businessman, his father. So they all are different. So I said to these girls now, so we had 10 men. So I said to them, now my goal as a pastor is to help every man become the best man he can be. And the only way that can happen is the same way it happened in my life. You have to put yourself under someone and learn from that person. So I've had my mentors in my life who taught me, and I mention them quite often, the people who taught me things and helped me learn things. And so from the time I was a small child all the way through my adult life, I found people with certain skill sets and knowledge, and I wanted to learn from them. But I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It just happened that I didn't have a father in my home, so I wanted to learn from other men things. So I said, now girls, I want you to take this guy. And I said, what's he like? And they said, well, he'd be like him. I said, well, that's good. That's good. Now, how can he be strong and be stronger? What other man does he need to learn something from? And so they'd say, oh, well, he needs to learn. For example, they'd say, well, they need to learn from Billy to always give the gospel to people. And they need to learn from John to be happy, stay on the sunny side. And they need to learn from Rick how to be studious and diligent about learning and helping people take the next step. And so I said, so what we do at the church, we try to cross-train men with other men. And that's what makes strong men in the church. Does that make sense to everybody? And so I want people to learn something. So what does Gene, now let's just take Gene. What does Gene need to learn from other men in this church? No, I'm just kidding. No, do you understand? So Gene has been with Billy, and he spent some time with him, right, Billy? And so what's some of the things you learned from Billy, Gene?
I learned from Billy that he has a unique sense of humor, and he is very serious about the gospel. He has a passion to get people saved, and that is really his focus. No matter how much that's going on, no matter how much is going on in his life, his main focus is to get people saved.
His main focus is to get people saved. That's what he's doing. Have you spent a lot of time with Matt Burke?
Yes, I have.
What did you learn from Matt?
I learned from Matt that he is very intelligent. He got saved when he was delivering pizza.
So that's just what he. But what did you learn from him?
What I learned from him is that he also has a passion for the ministry. He traveled around the world and he is able to preach the gospel in a very simple way.
So, Billy, what have you learned from Matt Burke?
I've learned from Matt Burke to be serious. He's serious about the work of the Lord. He wants to see people saved. That's what I've learned from Matt Burke. Very intelligent man. Very intelligent.
He is intelligent. Now, he's methodical and planning. He can plan long term. He stays focused on it. Like it took 8 months to plan the crusade in the Bahamas, diligently doing that while he's working a job, by the way, communicating with every principal and every superintendent in the Bahamas for 1 week crusade, getting them on that same page.
I thought that was just amazing.
Now, I don't know anybody, you think I could stay focused that long for 8 months on this one thing? So when we go overseas, I would let Matt plan our going into schools, going into places, into countries. Matt would plan that, methodically plan how to get everybody doing something. We took 26 people to the Bahamas, 26 A1 personalities, okay? And they worked together as an amazing team. And as a result, we had 14,500 some people saved. We presented the gospel to 42,000 people. We were in 38 schools and the teams, and we trained 200 workers in the Caribbean to do what we did. Now, I can tell you this, friends, nobody could put a meeting together like that except Matt that I know of. Now, he's quirky as all quirky can be, just like Billy's quirky and Gene's extremely quirky. But everybody has something. Okay, so as you think about these men in the Bible that you mentioned, I want you to think about them, and we'll do maybe just think about this week. And next week, I want you to tell me what it is about that person you mentioned. It don't have to be anything, Greek and complex. Just plain common sense. What's something they had that you think's a good quality for men to possess? Just something they had. Could be not a dozen, but one really redeeming thing about them. Okay, you think you can think about it? And Peter, you got Peter, right, Tom? Boy, he's a complex guy, but I'm sure you'll come up with something. Just one thing. And come back and say, here is a lesson from Peter, or here's a lesson from David, or here's a lesson from Paul, or here's a lesson from Philip and John the Beloved, and Bezalel, that I think every man ought to know this. Now, imagine if our church would work at learning from other men what makes them tick. We're not going to ever be just like. There's no two people in the world alike. But you can learn some things from people that my pop, for example, my beloved pop, he was my stepfather, but I never called him my stepfather to anybody. I would say, these are my parents, my mother and my pop, Sal and Ruby Gallardo. I never said, this is my stepfather. I said, these are my parents, my mom, my mother, and my pop, Sal and Ruby Gallardo. I introduced him as my parents. And by the way, what does the Bible say about Jesus in Luke chapter 2? That he was subject unto what? His what?
His
Parents. Now, Mary's his mother. Was Joseph his father? No, he was not his father, but he was his parent. And so the Bible says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. See how careful the Bible is about that? You may not be the biological father of your children, but you're the parent. And God commands people to obey the parents. And Jesus, the Bible says about Jesus, the example, he was such